Oh, hey, you're both together.
Yeah, man.
Hey, hey.
Good to see you, Simon. Good to see you, Sam.
Hey.
He's partial
Well,
one.
I'm only here in a non-Euclidean way.
Okay.
Mm.
Awesome. So where are you guys located right now?
So
In
we're at my place in Wageningen. It's also the place where we, I think, met. So, and we just, some came by yesterday. And let's see. Yeah, we just talked a bit. This morning we watched two videos of the McGilchrist meeting that you organized. We watched the
Nice.
talk with Mike Levin.
Uh-huh.
And what was the other one?
Tandeka, the one with Tandeka.
Tandeka, right, right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a flavor for how many diverse perspectives we had there, from
Mm.
the biological to the psychological and theological. Um, it
Mm.
was
What
quite a
was
fun.
the final synthesis of that conference, would you say? Did you reach some sort of synthesis?
Well, we ended up speaking a lot about the rise of artificial intelligence and the way that that's hopefully allowing us to get a better sense of what human intelligence is and human consciousness is, at least for those who are not caught up in the hype around AI. Um, but also, we were really whatever for whatever reason, because of concerns the audience brought and what some of the speakers were addressing, like John Vervaeke and Zach Stein, like they both spoke to the need to be careful with um, the cultural um, the pressure from marketers to integrate AI more and more into culture and the way that these companies are designing the interfaces, giving them human voices, really trying to convince us that we're talking to another human being and that's a dangerous path to head down, particularly when young people start to interact with these things.
Mm.
Um, and so that became one of the main a kind of rallying cry and to understand that not only are we that we have these two brain hemispheres that interact with the world very differently, and it could be that the left hemisphere, in Ian's sense, is more prone to a rigid, robotic, mechanical, more AI-like way of interacting with the world, whereas the right hemisphere brings in all the emotion, the context that, and the creativity that would be missing. But what's interesting about Ian's work that sometimes gets lost is that he's not saying that consciousness is reducible to the brain, even though
Mhm.
the brain is
Mm.
at the center of his project. And so, it's not just about integrating the hemispheres. It's about reconnecting with this deeper sense of human personhood and the way in which consciousness is, if it is emergent, it's emergent from the whole history of the cosmos and not just from, you know, neurons lining up in the right way inside the skull.
Yeah.
Um, so, if there was one issue that really stuck out, it was responding to the AI hype thing. But we're still working on an anthology to bring all
Mm.
the talks together. Hopefully, we'll have that finished sometime next year. Um, but yeah, glad you guys were able to watch a couple of those. Tandeka's work on affect is so important. And what she introduced with the small group work, I think, is potentially like a
Mm.
major source of social transformation. It's such a simple thing that she's suggesting, but there's a loneliness epidemic
Yeah.
in the Western world, and just getting people together to meet with each other. I mean, for her, she's coming out of um, the she's a Christian minister in the United Universalist Unitarian church, and the early from her point of view, the early Christianity before the Roman Empire co-opted it was all about small groups meeting in people's homes and stuff.
Mm.
And whether it's Christian or religious at all, she thinks that there's something about meeting with other people and being able to share from your heart on a regular basis that keeps us whole and happy and more able to imagine, contributing, like society becomes less of an abstraction and more of something that we can feel committed to and work towards. So yeah.
So something that struck me by watching this afternoon, watching first Mike Levin's talk on this bioelectricity and this sort of the recontextualization of a cell into a larger body or even into an organ. Having that in mind, and then watching the second talk, and which also struck me about that it's all about recontextualization into larger bodies or becoming aware of in what type of body what the type of body is that we inhabit. And someone and I were talking, and there was this idea of like, currently as individuals, we live very atomized and individualized. So we have a sense of self that sort of stops at the body, while potentially in sort of more older or indigenous cultures, there was a sense of self with the community, that you also feel like you are part of that body, that social body. And then we had this image of like, okay, if you're connected to God through religion, a religion, so maybe the body of Christ, then that's potentially like the body of the cosmos, so that you can feel one with the body of the cosmos. But in the meta crisis, we're dealing with a sort of deteriorating state of the biosphere, of sort of Gaia's life support systems. And so I got this image of like, does the human need to figure out like where is Gaia on the scale, and can we lock that in, as in become very aware that we are an organ in the body of this planetary organism. But yeah, it also spiraled off immediate questions like, do liver cells, do they feel contextualized within a complete body, or do they feel contextualized within a liver? But how does the liver feel contextualized within a body and not go off only doing liver things, let's say? So yeah, I don't know. I found that I would have to watch more talks, but for me, that was a sort of through line that was consistently becoming apparent. Yeah.
Yeah, different levels of organization and different identities at different scales. Yeah, I mean, there's so many interesting analogies to draw between cellular collectives and human communities. And
yeah.
If Gaia is like the there's with Gaia hypothesis and then Gaia theory, one of the main criticisms was this can't be an organism because there's no natural selection process that could have shaped it, because it's just one organism that's lived for billions of years. But if Gaia becomes sort of the prototype of life, and individual cells and multicellular plants and animals are sort of a derivative from that primary Gaian cell, then it kind of shifts our way of imagining what constitutes life away from just, it has to be something that can undergo natural selection, to there's a more primary mode of self-organization, right, in the cosmos that the Darwinian process can enhance in different ways, but didn't create, right? Life wasn't, evolutionary theory doesn't explain life. It presupposes life, in other words.
Yeah. It explains speciation, but not
right. Exactly.
pathogens, right?
Exactly.
I was also thinking, in what way is Mother Gaia, again, contextualized in grandmother cosmos, let's say, and is the extracellular matrix of Gaia to be found, in other non-living systems?
Yeah, just want to hear you guys a little bit better, so I'm putting on my headphones here.
Good.
Yeah.
So what is the tissue in which Gaia? I sometimes get the image of like an egg cell in an ovary. So is Gaia like is it also in a sort of also in that type of tissue, in this sort of different scales? Yeah. And also when you said what you said, Matthew, with the idea of like the life starting from this Gaia as one cell, that gave me like also this image of sort of the God consciousness um, branching off or scattering, diversifying itself. So that's also taking place in one whole. And that this is again an echo of that, so that you have a whole of the planet, and which also does this same move.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are also thinking too. It feels like when this this sense of self shrinks, and you get these individualized small selves, let's say, can we conclude that they are, in the more pure sense, like raw creativity, in the sense that they want to proliferate and explore and consume and build? You know, that also is what seems what cancer cells are doing, and maybe also these small revolutionary movements that occur on small cell scale in human society. That people decide like, okay, what the heck? I will start have conversations with you, and we chat about whatever we want instead of whatever the current ideology is informing us to speak about. And then is there then also, because it seems like we're putting like the evil, we put the evil in being small cell, but what is there? What wants to express in these small cells, you know? And is there also maybe something that we should take serious, that this is happening, instead of putting all our effort in preventing it and, you know, getting the large whole again intact?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about different organ systems and how in evolutionary history they may have started with, you know, a sub collective of cells in a body deciding to do something else that ends up being of benefit uh, to the larger organism. And you can't really tell in advance what's going to be cancer and what might be uh, and, you know, it's an interesting question to ask about the evolutionary history of the organ systems of different species, because you know there could be uh, lateral gene transfer, or there could be symbiogenesis, you know, where there's already something that a different species has achieved in terms of an organ system that then is able to migrate into a different organism, like already finished. But it could be that mutations happen in individual organisms where like a whole new uh, organ is produced that finds um, a function. Um, and when we look at human society, obviously these little splinter cells and these little groups that break off from the mainstream, you know, could be doing something uh, very dangerous. I hate to use the word, but it's the word we use, like terrorism, you know, like and there's um ecological groups that are increasingly considering, you know, blowing up infrastructure and whatnot. Is that are those groups cancerous, or are those groups trying to rescue us from ourselves? Or um and you know, definitely evil is a charged word, but I like Whitehead's way of thinking about this, that evil is just novelty in the wrong season, he would say. Too much creativity in the wrong place and time that ends up undermining its environmental context. And it would be difficult to tell initially whether the introduction of novelty into a social situation um, is going to degrade the level of organization and like lower the intensity of experience and beauty that can be achieved, or if it only temporarily does that, but then leads to a kind of a rebound where in response to that perturbation, that novelty, now a higher form of organization can unfold than would otherwise have been able to. And so with a lot of these things, it's hard to know in advance.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of the kind of work that Sam was doing with the microbial immune system, or immune systems in general. That initially something causes a disease because it's the non-self coming into relation with the self. And there's communication happening there. So it's like if a pathogen, if something comes in which is ultra optimized to let's say, eat up the host, then the host will be in response like, no, I cannot let you in, because if I let you in, I will be eaten. And so it's a sort of communication of, okay, this pathogen needs to strip down and become less invasive in order to become in an ongoing relationship with the host. And if we look at the human genome, it's completely penetrated with mobile genetic elements, remnants of retroviruses, which are all now functional in a sense, but were most likely previously were pathogenic in a sense.
Yeah.
Would you?
They again are also looking at those the 1% that survived, right? It's like so it feels sometimes a bit like a paradox that the cosmos is indeed striving towards more order and complexity, and judged from the fact that if you leave hydrogen plasm alone for 13.5 billion years, it will become humans and giraffes and rose bushes. But at the same time, that's only the 1% that became it, right? The other 99% is had a creative impact and wiped itself out the next moment.
Yeah,
that feels terrifying, also in the sense that we are walking this very finicky balance the whole time.
it's super nice because this strikes also in the conversation that we had when we were on a walk last night. It's also, and that's maybe nice to move the conversation a bit in that direction. It's like, what type of things do we wish to create? Are those the 99% that have an impact but are short-lived and nudge, let's say? Or are we crafting the 1% that has to stand the test of time? Sort of evolutionary strategies. So I'm curious to hear from you how that fits for you.
Well, I was thinking when we were talking about Gaia earlier, what's required to be able to drop into a kind of shamanic state whereby we are legitimately feeling the consciousness of the living earth, and that it might, the portal into that might have something to do with accepting our own death as individuals, because we're really trying to contact a consciousness that's beyond our individual lives. And the cells in our body are constantly dying and being replaced to maintain our sense of identity at this higher level. And so for Gaia, it's maybe not that individual human beings are totally unimportant, but it's the species level and even the ecosystem level that we'd be trying to contact. And so we're so used to being to having our consciousness located within our individual bodies and driven by the basic survival instincts of that level of identity, for good reason. But life is not the creativity of the living world is I think it shocks our usual sense of morality. Without death, evolution can't happen. Without 99% of species going extinct, this process doesn't work. And so even if there's something about life that in some ways precedes that Darwinian mechanism of speciation, death is still a big part of it. And it seems to me that being able to contact and commune with this Gaian intelligence or this Gaian consciousness really does require us to confront our own mortality and become capable of mobile identification, maybe would be the word for it, where we can shift levels. Because I don't think we want to be in a position, it just wouldn't work culturally for us to say you have to give up your individual identity and just totally die to yourself and become part of this larger organism. That's that could easily be taken up by a fascist ideology, So we want to maintain our sense of individuality, but also be able to genuinely contact a form of intelligence and of value that we are just one little cellular participant in, you know? Yeah. So I don't know how much experience you have in attempting to
Die.
legitimately, well, to die to the small self and commune with this larger organism. But it seems to me that it's challenging and easily dismissed by a more scientific mindset, not just for theoretical reasons, but for existential reasons, because the portal into that consciousness is through your own death as an individual on some level. And that's quite frightening.
I think I have some experience. I don't think on the largest on the let's say on the channeling scale. What came up for me is like probably we don't need the entirety of the human to be able to do this. We probably would need oracles like Oracle of Delphi or the sort of certain places where potentially also the energetic field of the earth is quite conducive for this, and people who are experienced with this who become sort of the voice of certain fields, and then it's done ritually. And I think then we have people who are capable of shape shifting into this larger in this larger field, but also able to return to this smaller self. And I think my experiences have been with psychedelic states and well, the sort of trance state is that often my tether to my body is quite strong, and that's both a benefit and also it's also sort of a negative, because for me to die, it's really I hold on with my claws, and it's like no, I'm not going. So I really become flattened by, for instance, ayahuasca and these kind of things. So that's also why I pursue it. But I think that flexibility, if I just sense into my own experiences there, I think that flexibility of being able to bounce back into my body, that gives me a very strong, almost a very strong bungee cord to go very deep or to go very high, knowing that I'll at some point will bounce back to sort of the everyday version of me.
But isn't it like intrinsic to the process of dying that it's one direction, you know? I really dying when you know that you're coming back to life.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Is that real death or is that just partial death? Yeah.
Yeah, or some death bypassing or something, you know, that you can also box this in some sort of defined that you can even define death.
Yeah.
It feels that that's the whole thing of death, that everything crumbles, even your I was also thinking, how can we induce that in modern man? You know, what is the modern equivalent of the skull on the desk that we can be reminded without maybe taking like full high doses of ayahuasca? Because this whole sense of like, I feel that there's this opposite current going on, right? That we have to strengthen ourselves to, you know, to flourish in daily life, and that forms of weaknesses are considered reducing your chances of being capable of being dragged along in the march of progress.
Yeah. The transhumanist move, I would say.
Yeah. There's a conference coming up here in San Francisco that one of these transhumanists is hosting. I forget his name, Brian something or other, I think.
Right.
It's called Defeat Death. And there's definitely this denial of death. I mean, there's this well-known anthropologist, Ernest Becker, who wrote a book called Denial of Death, where all of human culture is explained as a elaborate death denial. That we're searching for some kind of all cultures search for some kind of cosmic meaning that would allow us to cope with our mortality. And I think I wouldn't go quite that far. Obviously, death is a major, and the denial of it and our relationship to it is, I think, the fountain of so much of our spiritual feelings and our attempt to connect with something larger than ourselves. Like you have to confront death in order to genuinely contact spirit. And all these cultural forces are pushing us to deny that, and in that way closing that portal, and really trying to convince us that our consciousness is software running on the brain hardware, and creating this dream future that I think is totally sci-fi, that we'll be able to download our consciousness onto computers and we'll be immortal. And I think that's a delusion, a very serious delusion. And I even wonder if there's going to be some kind of speciation event in the next generation or two, as we'll have opportunities. It's not just that we'll have these things in our pockets. People will be implanting microchips and becoming increasingly cyborg, and other people will not want to do that. And it won't take more than a few generations before we can't even communicate with people who decided to implant the microchips, and maybe they'll all leave and go to Mars. But this is a major bifurcation point for our species in so many ways. And I think, I've been playing around with the idea of reincarnation. And I say playing around with it, not that because I don't take it seriously, but because I don't claim to have any actual memory of past lives or anything like that, but as a way of taking death seriously, but also not as just the end. And as a viable ecological ethics, if we were to, I'm a pragmatist, more or less, right? And so I would want to ask, what are the consequences of this belief for our own psychological sense of well-being and for the health of our society? What are the consequences of taking reincarnation seriously? And you can even have like a naturalistic version of it. We are inheriting billions of years of this stream of life on this planet. We are all of those countless organisms that lived and survived before us, reincarnated in human form. And we will, everything that we achieve is inherited, or our failures are inherited by, future generations. And so if we accept that kind of an ontology, that our consciousness is somehow continuous with this stream of life, and we will be here in the future, it brings a whole new meaning to that sense of ecological responsibility. It's like, it's not just about leaving the planet in a habitable place for those who will come after us, but no, you will be here. You have to deal with the consequences of this. And so you don't have, it's not altruistic even. It's just, reincarnation. We have always been here. We will always be here. And death is a transformation. It's not the end, and so you both become less attached to the form that you happen to take in this life, and you also feel more connected to this lineage and to the future. And so, whether or not we can know consciously what happens when we die, and I'm open that we could make that an empirical question with various altered states of consciousness, and whether through psychedelics or other means. But even if we can't, empirically establish this, I think, given that you can't disprove it, you really have to start asking, what are the pragmatic consequences of this way of believing? Because it's just as speculative to say death is the end.
Yeah, for sure. Now that resonates a lot. And coming from a person who does dare to make claims about knowing past lives. So this is one of the reasons why I started doing shamanic training, is being visited with past life events, and which I couldn't describe in any other way. Like, where are these coming from? And then becoming more and more real. And as that door has been opened in me, it's a sort of thing that visits. So it does make a big difference for me in understanding, like, oh, death is not the end at all. And it also shifts the responsibility or the importance of being here, and it makes it more sacred to me, because it's like, okay, I just have rounds that I'm here, and every time I'm here I incarnate in a different body and I have something else to do, and it's valuable to figure out what am I here to do, and do that to the best of my possibility, of my potential, and then the next round I'll see whatever is up then. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to live it to the fullest, this life.
No.
Right?
Yeah. No fear of missing out.
No fear of missing out.
Because it does put a lot of pressure if you imagine that this is your only life.
Yep.
That's a lot of pressure
Yeah.
to squeeze all the meaning of your existence into 70 years, 80 years if you're lucky. I think is itself a source of tremendous anxiety. On the other hand, if you accept reincarnation, there's no escape, there's no sleep. But I think it's
except the Buddha's path, let's say.
sure.
The last one.
Yeah.
But there's the Bodhisattva's vow. You got to come back for the rest of us. But in thinking about death too, I think it's important to think about the fractal layering here. And so nature is made of these cycles, and living organisms seem to be at the basic level rhythmic, right? And so every out breath is a kind of dying. We have to sleep at night. It's a kind of dying. Women have a menstrual cycle monthly. I think men have a subtler form of that. We have then, the annual seasonal cycles that we're embedded within. And so, winter is a kind of dying. Although interestingly, esoterically, people like Rudolf Steiner would say in the winter, our consciousness is actually more awake. In the summer, it's more asleep. And so sometimes these things get inverted, but nonetheless, there's this cycling of a waking, sleeping, living, dying rhythm, right? And so we see all of these cycles. And so why wouldn't we want to extrapolate from this such that the largest cycle that we're usually conscious of, birth and death, is just that, a cycle, that death leads to rebirth. I think there's many reasons why we might think that might indicate that there's a larger cycle underway here, and that death is something like mega sleep, hyper sleep, and then you wake up again. Cycles within cycles within cycles.
That makes me very curious to sense into what are these cycles like on a Gaian scale. So these mass extinction events, for instance, and then I would like to tie it to the use of fossil carbon, which is sort of death on a massive scale, which escaped the cycle of life because all those molecules weren't bioavailable. And so we are now in a stage where we're saying that we're ruining the planet by burning all the fossil fuels. But is on a Gaian level not something else happening here? Is not a huge amount of death that wasn't available for the sort of the cycle? Isn't that being re-injected into the body to potentially be incorporated again?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think about the oxygen crisis, what oxygen being pollution at the time.
Yeah.
And now we have carbon and plastic and all these forever chemicals that I don't know. Can we presume that life will find a way to digest these things? Maybe. But, again, it's to what extent does that introduction of novelty lead to a degradation of the life systems of the planet in the long term, or to what extent does it catalyze? I mean, maybe plastic will become, for some future organism, like a really nutritious, potent source of energy, which is a very weird thing to say because right now, it's hard to imagine anything more horrible than all these microplastics in our bodies and throughout every ecosystem on the planet. There's trash in the Marianas Trench in the deepest part of the ocean, and of course on the surface of the ocean. We've just discovered here in the US that there's a certain forever chemical in all of the drinking water that's cancerous, cancer causing. So it's PFAS, that chemical.
That's interesting, Matt, because then if we use again the analogy or the what Mike Levin talked about is that this cancer is the sort of an atomization or an individualization of a organism within an organism, and then treating the rest as an environment. Is there? I just like to speculate about what are these potential things that we perceive as things going completely wrong, as in, oh, this is terrible. What are potential other ways of interpreting these from a sort of Gaian perspective, with also a trying to feel a sort of humbleness that Gaia doesn't necessarily make mistakes. It's a process. So, and increased environmental carcinogens. Maybe that has also an effect on the context of for instance, the human psyche. It's this book on hospicing modernity and like the composting of modernity of a certain context that needs to be broken down into smaller parts so it can be recontextualized into something else. And I think that's the dying again. And so I wonder if if there's not an adaptation here at some point.
Well, it does seem that microplastics work as like pseudoestrogens in the human body, right? And so fertility rates are plummeting, and this could be Gaia's immune response to lower human population, among other things. So yeah, there could be something like that. I mean, if Gaia is a living organism, of course, there's an immune system here. And when the human being becomes so cut off, the human community, at least in the Western industrialized world, becomes so cut off from the larger organism of which it is a part, that's going to certainly catalyze a major immune response from Gaia. But I also resist the idea that somehow, and the environmental movement at various points has thought of the human being as a kind of parasite, that the earth would be better off without us. I think there's something tremendously valuable potentially that Gaia has reason to want the human to succeed, and that we're not just a cancer, but at this stage in our history, we're we're still in an adolescent phase, and we are rebelling from our parent, thinking that we could live on our own separately in our little technological artificial womb that we're trying to create for ourselves in all these different ways. And that's not going to work. So we're dealing with that negotiation, right, between the immune system of the planet and, maybe Gaia wants us to be here, but we need to be a little bit less carnivorous or something, and not eat the body that hosts us.
Yeah. So in that line, I'm also thinking that feeling just amazing stuff there.
Oh no.
Now you were going into the appearing and the disappearing of subtle experiences within the body.
I was saying that that the service we maybe owe to Gaia, or the service that we can do to Gaia, is exactly make use of this self-reflecting capability, that separates us from, arguably all other Gaian expressions, and that we can actually sense at the phenomenological level what Gaia is doing. And then what you immediately notice is that your this whole constellation of experience that you are that arguably started all the way, at the Big Bang, or perhaps whatever where it started, but it has been going on for a very long time to reach in the present moment where you experience these sensations that are not there, that are popping their head up, that show some sort of features and then perish again, they die again, right? And we can actually maybe for the first time experience that on a conscious level, and that feels in a very mystical way something that we also owe them to do, right? Is it kind of like in those lines of Hegelian, cosmos waking up to itself? I feel that that's what we are. And not so much on reflecting from our senses or something, but reflecting from the radical, from the flesh, let's say, the direct experience of the body. And there is also a bit awkward that now the opposite tendency seems to be going on, namely that instead of our attention on these experiences is not strengthening, but it's dissipating, right? Our attention spans are being destroyed by all means. So we get like a lower resolution of us being Gaia. Then that feels like two things running in the opposite directions. And also maybe there is Gaia saying, you guys are not ready yet to become Gaia. But I don't know, but it feels that there is something very powerful that the human can bring.
No, that sounds like a super nice point, Sam. And I think that that move that you make, that you say, that the civilization is making, that the one end is the transhumanist and adolescent psyche that wants to become immortal because it fears death, and the other that will in the end present, or what that is presenting is a very clear way of being for the person who's so inclined to more, let's say, more be aligned with Gaia, to say like, oh, that's not definitely not the thing that I want to do, like the antithesis, and then you're being called towards this opposite end. So I have a feeling that is maybe also going on.
Yeah,
maybe
I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I was also thinking that this whole project of death denial, is it then a coincidence that that this mechanist frameworks are being carried so well now? That seems to be the ultimate way of defeating death, is by just just extracting life from it, because then death also doesn't exist.
Yeah, by saying it's not alive in the first place.
Then it can also not die, and that maybe is the best way we can hide from it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite taken by these spiritual views that that spirit needed to take on flesh and blood in order to become conscious of itself, and that that spirit without embodiment is just this unconscious longing. It has nothing to reflect on itself through, and that the body gives it something by which it can enter into relationship, become self-reflexive as a result of entering into relationship, and that's the real telos here, is towards greater and greater embodiment, and that death is actually, I think of in Tolkien's Middle Earth, like the elves are very curious about human beings, because the elves are immortal, they don't die, and human beings die, and they really want to understand what is that, and so I think in some sense, what for us in our egoic fearful perspective seems like something terrible, actually for the spiritual world is this great gift. And like what does being these fragile biological creatures so that are self-conscious, what is that? Can we reverse this transhumanist trajectory where death needs to be eliminated? It's a disease, it's a horrible thing, and instead ask how it might be a gift, and ask what it might offer to us. And it's an opportunity, I think, to cultivate a form of love and compassion that's beyond our own egos, right? If you don't die, there's less pressure to break through to that level of like of cosmic compassion, and to love others, love the world, despite the fact that you are gonna die one day, right? And to not, a lot of people, uh, I think, have this reaction to their own mortality that's like, yeah, more or less adolescent, like getting really mad at God or at whatever created the universe, that like, why would you put me in this situation? Like this sucks. And it's, we can get locked in our fearful little egoic perspectives, and yeah, miss out on the opportunity that spirit is trying to give us, to experience death again as a portal to a larger form of identity. And we're really at that, we're entering into this bottleneck right now, where, I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but to say that like people are popping, like they can't, the pressure to transform is becoming so intense that people are either becoming shamans or losing their minds, or
Or
becoming,
both.
or yeah, or maybe some
Case
overlap.
study right here.
Or just that, more or less the status quo can't hold anymore, and so there's a bifurcation occurring, and we're going to these opposite extremes, perhaps. But
I'd like to just note a small point that you mentioned, where you said like, okay, it's the gift of spirit, becoming incarnated, so spirit in the flesh, and that you said then there's the ability to reflect. And I just got that image of, yeah, the resistance of the flesh gives the spirit something to sort of bounce off on, or it's the reflection of the light and being refracted or reflected back. So that was a nice point. Just pretty
yeah,
image.
exactly. We're like the prisms, that allows light to take on color, uh, or the mirror. Yeah,
Now, do you
yeah,
think that God also wants to not be lonely anymore, and that's a form of this self-consciousness thing? Just also that just popped in my head when you were saying that, yeah, if you can be aware of yourself in this manifold of expressions that is the cosmos as a totality, it feels like an antidote to loneliness, right? In the sense as if you're just this non-reflective burst of play that
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's cosmic communion, like
communion.
we're growing the body of God, together. And I think it's somewhat, has a holographic structure. So, there's God within each of us, and there's this, uh, um, divine, uh, family, I suppose, with Gaia, uh, being our sort of local, divinity, and then, perhaps the sun is another, and we're part of the sun's body, and the galaxy. And this is the larger project that we're engaged in as individuals in communion with one another. We're building, growing, uh, God a body, so that, uh, uh, God can become conscious, um, through us, and that consciousness is not something separate from us that's directing the show, that's in charge of everything that happens. No, it's far more participatory than that. Um, and again, this is the sort of, pragmatism as a philosophy can often be dismissed as just, looking for the cash value, and it can sound very mundane, but I think the deeper, participatory way of understanding it is that, like, the extent to which this divine body is real, the extent to which God is real, very much depends on whether we are willing to participate in sustaining and supporting and growing God, right? So it's not something just independent of our own will and conscious agency. So it's kind of irrelevant of, whether or not you can prove that God exists. It's more about behaving, acting as though God did exist, so as to make it true. Yeah. And it's a polytheism too, right? Because there are, like, God is a community. God is not just one big being in the sky, but is a community. We need a more organic way of thinking about spirit, that this is beings living within beings at different scales, and it's probably infinite, and so we deal with the local deities that we can see and feel, and probably for Gaia or for the sun, there are they worship an even larger, for us incomprehensible kind of divine body.
But it all stops at the quark's spirit. That we have to have an ending there.
Oh yeah.
It also
Perhaps,
feels
yeah.
that this tissue of that God community is love, right? And then it feels also that the opposite of love is not per se hate, but because hate is still a form of communion, right? You're still in communion with the thing you hate. But indifference seemed to be like the crumbling
Yeah.
anti-force to love. So that also feels
Yeah.
close to my heart, like how to heal indifference and collective indifference. And it seems there an antidote is wonder, right? That the wonder is like a way out of complete detachment from.
Yeah.
And again, see like, okay, there is I have no clue yet what it is, but I feel that there is some guidance, a pulling, an attractor here that I will need to investigate. And that also like nicely hooks into what you were saying earlier of us all being organs in the Gaian body. Like, what the hell are you, right? Are you a heart? Like what we spoke about earlier, are you a heart, a liver? Are you a skeletal muscle? And what can help you find that specific organ that you are? And then I feel here again, wonder is some sort of call from the distance that says you have to come here. And I'm also wondering how that ties into like this urge that Whitehead speaks about so often, and if this is also represented somehow at this very like actual occasion level of that they also feel a pull towards wherever they need to be, or is this just a many becoming one and in some sort of yeah, robotic way almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think the various cell types in the human body are all committed to playing their role for the sake of this larger whole, for the most part, until environmental toxins cause some cancerous growth. But the analogy must hold for human beings that we have diversification of labor and diversification of capacity. And I think it's helpful here also to think in terms of reincarnation, that, like, just because you might be a liver cell in this life doesn't mean that next time you won't maybe get to be a heart cell or a brain cell, but all the roles are essential. And over the course of multiple lifetimes, like, we get to we get to move around. But if you don't have that sense of larger cycles of life and death that you can identify with at a transegoic level, then it might be harder to accept your lot in this particular life as the toenail or whatever.
The feeling I'm getting as we're talking about it, I'm feeling into the migration or migration aspect. So you have a lot of stem cells which are found within the tissue that they're in, and then the context determines what they differentiate into. So you can imagine that on a personal level or on a developmental level, that maybe in a more previous cultural history, it was very normal that you grow up, your father has a certain occupation, you grow up to do that occupation, and so that feels more coherent. And as you were just speaking, I was like, oh, I have the sense, or what if we're growing a new organ and there's migration towards that organ, and it's still not decided what that organ actually is, and we're in the process of doing that. And that's why we can feel, I think, me, but also people I interact with, can feel very lost in this sort of the time between worlds, as Zach Stein calls it. It's like this is it also the space between organs? It's like we're being moved from our previous state of organ, where we feel like we're not functioning at all. This is I'm not wanting to project too much, but it's my experience. And then moving towards a different organ, but that's also still like what the hell is this thing? What am I supposed to do in this organ?
That ties also nicely in with the consciousness development, right? Maybe some of us are at the stage that they are channeling some form of consciousness that nobody ever saw. Yeah, what are you going to do with it? It's a good question. And also, is there support in society for performing that role of being like this weird clump of flesh that
yeah,
which enzymatic activity is still
and that can't even say itself like, no, this is important, this is
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of Pierre Teilhard Chardin's idea of the noosphere, which many transhumanists have appropriated Teilhard, and they think that the noosphere is the internet, and that our destiny as human beings is to evolve into, some kind of machine consciousness. But what if this new organ is the consciousness of Gaia, and that all this infrastructure to support the internet is just the scaffolding for something subtler, that like once it takes form and can support itself as a new organ with a function that's clear, then a lot of this the heavy machinery, as it were, can subside. And the organ can support itself more organically, let's say. And so all of these server farms and like the energy that's being poured into artificial intelligence or whatever, hopefully, or maybe that's just the scaffolding, right? That's necessary to boot up this new mind. Maybe that's the wrong metaphor, but
the interstitial tissue sort of, and that the cells can locate in that. And then I'm thinking like, okay, we're communicating half a world across. And so it's certain modes of thinking that can be connected and can vocalize and that can communicate with each other, that can exchange. And this is happening on a massive scale on the planet. And that's maybe this assemblage of this new organ, which isn't necessarily an assemblage in, doesn't have to be an assemblage in sort of the spatial realm, or it has to, so it doesn't necessarily have to be in close proximity as we normally understand that.
Yeah. But just, I mean, the internet is functioning to create and accelerate the creation of a kind of planetary culture, right? Because we're able to interact with people across borders of different continents. And, Marshall McLuhan thought this would lead to a kind of global village. It's turned out to be a major catalyst for an increased culture war, as it turns out. But again, that could be growing pains, and that the overall result of this, it's only been a few decades of you know,
Yeah.
the internet. That we're going through the difficult period of chaos before the next sort of regime of order can emerge. But that once that we're able to stabilize that sense of planetary culture, then it's like it's a new mode of consciousness that then doesn't need the high energy throughput of the internet infrastructure to support it. And, you know, I know technologies will advance and hopefully there will be less energy intensive ways of maintaining international communication. Because it's certainly better to do this than to have people in airplanes flying around all the time,
Yeah.
in terms of the impact on environments. But yeah, it's like having the trust that the trajectories that currently seem like a death spiral are actually the growth of new organs, and that sometimes that means a period of sickness and disease before, you know, as you were saying earlier, before this negotiation is worked out such that this now this body with new capacities can stabilize.
Hmm. And maybe also not to interfere too much with what naturally wants to unfold. We have all these conceptions of what this organ should be doing, and somehow
Right.
it's not working so far, right? So maybe there again is some form of humility, that trust in Gaia, let's say, that she will know what she's evolving.
Yeah, no, humility is a big part of this. I think that's also related to the death acceptance. Remembering that we're made of earth. We're just mud and water, you know. Not just. That's an amazing thing that mud and water can be conscious, and strive to understand these larger cycles and processes that we're embedded within. My friends, I feel like we just started talking, but I already need to run to another meeting here. This was so generative. I like jamming with you guys. We should do this again.
Yes. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, I agree. A lot of fun, lots of nice imagery, cool things.
Yeah. Are you guys happy for me to share this video?
Online?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds
Excellent.
good. Yeah.
I'll
fun
do
stuff.
that.
Make
And
sure to have that little bit where you lost me. That was
I'll
the
cut that out, yeah. Yeah.
Just edit something. Use ChatGPT with a model that's to fill it with some gibberish.
Easy enough. Great. All right. Yeah, let's do this again soon. I'll find a time over email and continue the conversation because I think what we're exploring is super important.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of other people are struggling with these questions, and it could be helpful to do some more mind melding and find words and stabilize these ideas so that we can move into the future as consciously as we can.
Sounds perfect, Matthew. And yeah, to do some more jamming in this new organ.
Exactly.
Figure out what this slime mold thing is.
experimental jazz
Yeah.
in the biosphere.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Nice.
All
Thanks,
right,
man.
guys. Have a
Take
good
care.
night. Talk to you soon.
See you, man.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Hello.